Hi everyone, I am Erwin A. Mariano, and allow me to share with you my knowledge on the statistical tools and its application in research work. So first, we have to define statistics. Statistics is the branch of mathematics which deals with the collection, organization, and interpretations of data. Take note, interpretation of data. Allow me to give you the uses of statistics. Number one, it summarizes data for public use. And number two, it aids in decision making, like it provides comparison, it explains action that has taken place, it justifies a claim or assertion, and it estimates unknown quantities. Now, in choosing appropriate tests, you must consider these three: your data, your samples, and your purpose. So what is the level of measurement you use for your data? How many samples do you have to consider? And what is the purpose of your analysis? So let's start with data. Is your data nominal? So what do you mean by nominal data? In statistics, a nominal data is a type of data that is used to label variables without providing any quantitative value. It is the simplest form of scale of measure. So in nominal data, you're going to use symbols to represent your data. Actually, this nominal data is also called categorical data, qualitative data, and non-parametric data. In nominal, you just use letters and symbol to represent this data. Is your data interval or ratio? Now, when we say interval data, also called an integer, it is defined as a data type which is measured along scale, in which each point is placed at equal distance from one another. So in interval data, it doesn't have a defined absolute 0 point in which is present in ratio data. So some of the statistical tools that you have to use if your data is interval or ratio: test for a mean, difference of two means, for independent samples, regression analysis, and difference of two means. Now, on the ordinal data, you can place it whether in nominal or interval or ratio. It depends to its circumstances, okay? But the ordinal data, from the word of ordinal, it is ranking data, wherein you are ranking the data based on its characteristics. Now, what about samples? In this, you have to consider the sample size that you have. Is there a one sample? Is there two samples? Or how many groups do you have? Right? Now, let's define first population and samples, since we are talking about samples. Population is the totality of the respondents under consideration, while samples is a subset of the population. Right? So if your population is known, you can use Islevin's formula to find the sample size. But if your population is unknown, you can use a non-population standard deviation. So how many sample size do we need to consider, or how many population size do we need to consider? Now take note, if your population is greater than or equal to 80, you must use sample size. Okay? By using this Levin formula, if your population size is known, so n is greater than or equal to n all over 1 plus ne squared, where capital N is the population size and small letter n is the sample size and is the margin of error. The margin of error is usually 1% up to 12% depending on the research study. Let me give you an example. Chilito Zamora Senior High School has a population of 765. Determine the sample size with 5% level of significance. So using the formula, n is greater than or equal to n all over 1 plus n squared. So substitute the given. We have 765 as population size. So therefore, using your calculator, we have 262.66 or simply 263. Take note that you must express the percent into decimal. Okay? Now, of course, your purpose. What is the purpose of your analysis? Are you looking for the relationship or are you looking for the differences? Alright, so let's start with the statistical tools. Right, number one is frequency count and percentage, and number two is weighted mean. So when do we use frequency count and percentage? Frequency count and percentage can be used if we want to know the number of responses for each indicators. Usually ginagamit ito sa demographic profile or for profiling purposes ng respondents natin. Number two, yung weighted mean. Yung weighted mean can be used to get an overall idea or picture of the dataset. Mean is the best use for dataset with numbers that are close together. With weighted mean, definitely, kailangan meron tayong Likert scale. Yung Likert scale is a unidimensional scale that you use to collect respondents' attitudes and opinions in relation to your study. For example, yan, very adequate, slightly adequate, inadequate. So definitely, kailangan meron tayong corresponding weight range and scale. Now, for your Likert scale, you can use this simply psychology.org/Likert-scale.html to choose appropriate Likert scale in relation to your study. Number three is z-test. So when do we use z-tests? Take note, my dear students, that z-tests can be used to determine the significant differences of the respondents. So basically two groups of respondents. So we need to consider the sample size. If your sample size is greater than 30, you have to use z-test. Of course, you have to consider z-test for one population mean, z-test for independent proportions, or z-test for dependent proportions, or comparing two sample means. Let me give you an example. Is there a significant difference between students and teachers in terms of opinion toward charter change? Take note that our group of respondents here are students and teachers. So if we need to test their significant differences relative to their opinion toward charter change, the best statistical tool that you're going to use is z-test. Take note that your respondents must be greater than 30. However, if your respondent is less than 30, you have to use t-test. So like z-test, t-test can be used to determine the significant differences of your data. Take note, you must have two groups of data. Example, is there a difference between the two groups of children in terms of achievement and statistics? So the only difference between z-test and t-test is z-test for 30 and above, 31 and above, 31 and above, while t-test can be used for the respondents with 30 and below. Another common statistical tool is one-way analysis of variance. So if d-test and z-test can be used for two variables, in one-way analysis of variance, you have to use this if we have three groups of data. Okay, let me give you an example. Is there a significant difference between the three groups of children in terms of achievement in statistics? Another statistical tool that you can employ in your study is chi-square test of goodness of fit. So this test is used to determine if there is significant difference between the observed frequency and the expected frequency. Let me give you an example. Is there a difference between the observed and expected distributions of parents' responses? Another is chi-square test of independence. The only difference between chi-square test of goodness of faith and chi-square test of independence, the chi-square test of independence can be used to determine if there's a correlation, association between the variables of the nominal type. Okay, nominal type. So for example, is sex related to drink preferences? Sex is a nominal. Another statistical tool that you must consider is person-product moment correlation or person R. This statistical tool can be used if your variable are in interval or in ratio data. Take note, you must have two groups of data to compare. So for example, is there a correlation between self-concept and mental ability? Like what I've told you a while ago, you must consider your data. Okay, in person R, your two groups of data must be in interval or ratio data. Another is Spearman rank order correlation or Spearman co. From the word itself, Spearman rank order, here your data must be in ordinal form. For example, is faculty rank correlated with teaching effectiveness? So if your data is in order, definitely the best statistical tool that you're going to employ is Spearman rank order correlation. Take note, we have to consider that your variables are two groups. Now, kung tama naman ang iyong computation pero mali yung pag-statement ng decision, baliwala din. Okay, so there are three ways on how to state your decision: by using confidence interval, by using p-value approach, or critical value approach. Ito lang ang tatandaan natin. We can choose between p-value approach or critical value approach. In p-value approach, take note, if p-value, the computed p-value is less than or equal to the alpha level of significance, your decision must be reject the null hypothesis. Otherwise, accept the alternative hypothesis. Now, in critical value approach, opposite naman. In critical value approach, if the test statistics or the computed stats is greater than or equal to the critical value you found in the table, all you have to do is to reject the null hypothesis. Otherwise, accept the null hypothesis. So you can choose between p-value approach or critical value approach. Now let's move on in the data interpretation. So how do we interpret the data? According to Reyes 2004, data interpretation refers to adequate exposition of the true meaning of the material presented in terms of the purpose of the study. So meaning it refers to the implementation of processes through which data is reviewed for the purpose of arriving at an informed conclusion. So the interpretation of data assigns a meaning to the information analyzed and determines its signification and its implication. Now let's proceed to the steps in data interpretation. Alright, so number one, revisit the mean and sieve problems. So it pertains to the statement of the problem that you have in chapter 1. Number 2, describe the data, meaning it will depend on the statistical tools that you are going to employ. And then number 3, plan for appropriate way to present the data collected through tabular form, graphical form, or any other way. So number 4, plug in additional information. And number 5, have closure or concluding statement in every data interpretation. Take note, the essence of your chapter 2 is to strengthen your data interpretation. Okay, so definitely at the latter part of your data interpretation, you must have a closure or concluding statement. Okay, so let me give an example. Here are the statement of the problem. The aim of this study is to determine the level of knowledge of teacher clinicians in providing first aid care in public elementary schools. This is for a leveled up first aid training program. Specifically, the study sought to answer the following questions. Number 1, what is the profile of the teacher clinician's manner in terms of age, sex, civil status, length of service, and related training seminars attended? Number two, what is the level of knowledge of the teacher clinicians in the following first aid practices? Treating wounds and burns, applying ointment for stomach ache and headache, applying toothache drops, bandaging, and splitting. Is there a significant difference in the assessment of the respondents on the level of knowledge of the teacher clinicians in the first aid practices when grouped according to their profile? Okay, so we have a hypothesis here. So definitely, SOP number one, from age down to the related trainings and seminars attended. Related trainings and seminars attended. Definitely the statistical tools that you're going to use is frequency count and percentage. So yung SOP2, definitely it depends upon the variables that you have. So kung Likert scale, most probably weighted mean ang gagamitin. So number 3 naman, we are looking for the significant differences. Take note, since the purpose is we need to look for the significant differences. So yun na yun. We have to consider that. And yung number 3, yung sinasabi ko kanina, yung purpose nga natin, yun nga yung significant differences. And then yung number 2, yung samples we have when grouped according to their profile. Okay? And then of course, yung number 1 is yung level of measurement ng ating data. Okay, so here are the results. So for you to be able to present the data, definitely in chapter 4, you have to use introductory statement in chapter 4. Since chapter 1 pertains to the demographic profile of the respondents, tingnan niyo mabuti kung paano natin interpret. The following tables show the demographic profile of the respondents subject of the research in terms of age, sex, civil status, length of service, and related training seminars attended. Take note, no, the introductory statement is very important. So these variables will eventually be used to determine its relationship to the technical skills of teachers, clinicians, and the first aid practices employed in the school. So ito yung table na ginamit. Okay, so in presenting the data, ang ginamit ng researcher ay through tables. So like what I told you, frequency count and percentage ang statistical tool na pwedeng i-employ. Take note, yung age ay ginurupo, nagkaroon ng scale. He grouped the respondents according to their age from 21 to 25, 26 to 30, and so on and so on. Okay, so how do we interpret the table? Ayan. So definitely, balikan natin ha. Yung table natin, kailangan may pangalan. Okay? So table 1 shows the demographic profile of the respondent in terms of age. It can be gleaned from the table that 19 or 45.24% of the respondents have an age ranging from 31 to 35 years old. So meaning to say, sa pag-interpret, kung ano yung nilalaman ng table, yun lang ang i-interpret. Okay? And then, tingnan nyo mabuti yung concluding statement. This indicates that the respondents are prepared, discerned, and capable to answer the given questionnaire. Okay. So, kumuha lang ako ng descriptive rating for the SOP number 2. So, yung in terms of treating asthma using nebulizer. So, like what I've told you, weighted mean ang ginamit. So, sa table, kailangan makikita doon yung legend kung ano yung ginamit niyo na like sa Likert scale. HK, highly knowledgeable. K, knowledgeable. KN, less knowledgeable. And K is not knowledgeable. So, how do we interpret this data? So, like what I told you, kailangan may pangalan yung table. So, table 14 shows the respondent's assessment on the list variable in the level of knowledge of the teacher clinician in terms of treating asthma using nebulizer. So, kung mapapansin nyo rito, ang in-interpret lang ay yung pinaka-highest weighted mean. So, it can be gathered in table 14 that most of the respondent highlighted the indicator in which it says that the teacher clinician assembles the hose to an air compressor having a weighted mean of 3.10. So, kung mapapansin nyo, yung 3.10 yung pinaka-highest weighted mean. So, sa pag-interpret ng weighted mean, kung ano yung pinaka-highest, doon tayo mag-start. And then, of course, from highest to lowest. And then, the concluding statement. In general, most of the respondents are knowledgeable in first aid practices in terms of asthma. And then, you have to support that using your related study in chapter 2. Alright? Now for the statement of the problem number 3, we are looking here for the significant differences in the assessment of the respondents on the level of knowledge of the teacher clinicians in the first aid practices when grouped according to their profile. So in terms of age, how many groups do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 groups. So definitely we cannot use t-test or z-test. So in this case, we need to apply analysis of variance or ANOVA. So in ANOVA, you have to show the F value, the computed F value, and the computed P value. So P value approach ang ginamit. So like what I've told you, if P value is less than or equal to the alpha level of significance, all you have to do is to reject the null hypothesis. Otherwise, accept. Since in this case, 0.424 is greater than 0.05 level of significance, so all you have to do is to accept the null hypothesis. So here, the remarks is not significant. So how do we interpret that? Now, like I told you, you have to start with the name of the table. So table 15 shows the test of significant difference of the respondent assessment on the level of knowledge in the first 8 practices when grouped according to their age. So you have to start with the weighted mean, followed by the F value and P value, and then your concluding statement. So it can be concluded that there is no significant difference in the assessment of the respondents on the level of knowledge in the first 8 practices when age is concerned. So you have to support this in relation to your chapter 2. Okay, so like for example, in this case, the result signifies that the respondents have the same point of view on the knowledge in the first 8 practices, even when they have a difference in time of life. So that's it. So if you have any question, just approach me anytime, anywhere. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.